Because, the other thing is, even comments on that same article were like, well, one of the authors isn't even an architect. And so now you have to be an architect to even have an opinion on this. We are way too protective of this.
To your point about, are we losing control of the term architect? Oh, we lost control of that thing a long time ago.
What's architecture really about? Archispeak is the show that dares to peek under the architectural kimono, exposing what architecture really is, what it is that architects really do, and show you why we are passionate about our chosen profession. I'm Evan Troxel. Join Neil Pan, Cormac Phelan, and me as we have a casual conversation about all things architecture, which includes all the stuff people don't talk about. Think you already know what architecture is really about? Tune in to find out. It's time for some Archispeak.
And with that, welcome to episode 21 of the Archispeak podcast. I'm Neil Pan.
I'm Evan Troxel.
And I'm Cormac Phelan.
And we're sad to report we have no friends of the show for this episode. So we're gonna dive right into it with who earns the title of architect. We're going to deal with this subject here today. We'll have it in the show notes, but there was an article on Fast Company, and it created a bit of a stir recently about why Daniel Libeskind is no architect. And the article's discussing the global debate raging inside the architecture community over who earns the title architect. So we're going to start off with that.
And real quick, before we even jump into that, show notes are at archispeakpodcast.com/episode/21. And you can sign up to get them delivered right to your inbox.
That's right.
All right.
Well, if you look at if you look at the article and you kind of break it down, first, if you just start with the Daniel Libeskind is no architect. And, it's talking about the American Institute of Architects LinkedIn group. They posted this article, which was kind of a conversation started from an article written in Britain over the use of the term architect or designer when you're practicing architecture in the entire country, because they have a licensure that basically covers the entire country, unlike ours, which is state by state. And so it started talking about that. And you kind of read through it all, and it starts talking about, if you haven't earned a license or if you don't have a license in that country, you can't be called an architect. When we started talking about whether or not we were going to talk about this article on the show, I actually circulated it around to a few people in the office, and we were debating if you went, like, say, Neil, you are a registered architect in the state of California. So if you come out to
licensed architect,
what did I say?
We don't call it registered here.
Yeah.
Whatever. Licensed, registered.
This is exactly the point.
No. It's very important.
Okay.
I am not a registered architect in the state of California. I am a licensed architect.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, as a licensed architect who went through all of the tests and was, passed and deemed worthy of being, of earning a license to practice architecture in the state of California, you are entitled to the term architect. Now,
right, yes.
If you travel, it was kind of this interesting thing. If I go to another state and you're not registered in that state, if you're wanting to practice in that state, you're wanted to be called a designer, not an architect. But in his particular case, he's not on the list to the RIBA or whatever it is. He's not on the list to be an architect in Britain. So when he practices there, he typically pairs up with someone else who is a registered, licensed architect, and that's how they practice. But what's deceiving about this is they say Daniel Libeskind is no architect. Well,
that's a headline.
It's a headline. It's a news grabber, and all this other
generator.
Stuff. And so and the interesting thing about it is, and the reason that I wanted to bring it up is, so you go down to the comments, and it's really the comments that kind of are amazing, because, they're just like, oh, he shouldn't be calling himself an architect if he's not a licensed architect. And it goes on and on. There's hundreds of comments. And so I was just like, okay, the guy's a registered architect. You go to the New York State website and I did, just for the hell of it. I went to the New York State, and sure enough, Daniel Libeskind has a license, and I'm not going to read his license number out loud, but there is a license that he received in 2003, and he is registered through for 2015.
Yeah.
He's an architect.
There's a clarification, and I don't know when this clarification was posted to the article. It does state, as a clarification for his article, I don't think this was here originally when I saw it, but it does say that he is registered in 3 countries, the United States, which actually isn't really clear, because I don't know how many states he's registered in, but obviously New York, as you just said, but Germany and Italy. So he can practice in all 3 countries, but apparently not the UK.
Right. His office is in New York, so he's a registered New York architect.
Makes sense.
In fact, the reason that he went through the whole process of it was because when he was put in charge of the Ground Zero, basically the remaking of Ground Zero in the Trade Center area, and he was designing buildings, well, he couldn't technically be designing any of those buildings if he wasn't, registered. But
that's not even true. He just couldn't sign the drawings.
He couldn't sign off on the drawings.
That's true. You're right. That's true. So that led to a question that actually one of my friends at work said. Okay, so Neil, you're a registered, licensed architect in California. Yes. If you're to travel around, so now that you came to DC, well, you're not a licensed or registered or anything architect in DC. You're no longer are you no longer an architect because you're somewhere else? And it's this ridiculous notion that
it's ludicrous politics.
Exactly. And anybody can get can partner up and pair with somebody to have it legally signed and sealed in that jurisdiction. Doesn't necessarily, to me, make them any less of a capable quality architect. It just is semantics, or it's actually, well, whatever.
But you can only say that because you're not licensed. You don't know what it's like. Now, and I say that tongue in cheek, but I mean,
I know
we're gonna hear that, right? They're gonna email you.
Well, here's the thing,
email Cormac, everybody.
His Twitter account's listed on our website.
How many times have you met and this is going to piss off a lot of people, but you've met these kids who come out of school. Their only desire is to get licensed, registered, and so they basically do their IDP time. They sit for the exam. They get their license. And now they're an architect.
Right.
With 3 years of experience.
Yep.
Okay.
To me, that's not an architect. That's somebody who sat for a test and is now called an architect, but still is lacking a huge amount of experience and skill to truly be able to take a building from conceptual design to handing over the keys on a finished building.
Well, beyond that.
That's somebody who may not have the experience of doing all of that, but they are at least familiar with the process. That part of the exam, and we'll have a link in our show notes for this too, to Bob's most recent article. One of the things I like in it is he does, show all the different types of exams and the process for the different ARE exams over the years. It's a pretty broad series of exams, and it covers a lot of different aspects of practice. And you don't do all of these different things. I mean, I don't think I've ever dealt with a construction change directive in my entire 25 plus year career.
And I just finished. But I just finished writing one.
Okay, there you go. But am I any less of an architect because of the work that I do doesn't involve that type of stuff? I mean, it's an interesting question, because the type of work that I've done most of my career, most architects wouldn't even consider architecture. And so, where does that leave somebody like me? Who is quote unquote a license? I was the guy who I passed all the exams. I got my license, and the reason I did is twofold. One, I wanted to become an architect, and two, I got tired of saying, "Well, I'm kind of a designer. Blah blah blah. I'm not really an architect.
A lot of people do it for that reason alone." I'm not supposed to say
that.
Yeah.
I was like, damn it, I'm going to get this thing, and then I'm going to proudly say I am an architect, and then I don't have to make any excuses anymore.
Look, don't get me wrong. I mean, I don't want to diminish anybody's achievement for taking that extraordinarily difficult pain in the ass of a test, period. Yes. I mean, and it's not that, there are plenty of schools out there that do start to, help you learn the profession. And I don't want to get off on that tangent either. But there's a lot of people out there that aren't really prepared to hold the title of architect, yet still do.
But that's okay.
But before we get off on that.
Well, I think even people might argue that Daniel Libeskind doesn't deserve to hold it.
Well, and if you read the comments in the article, or
not just semantically, but I mean just experiencing his buildings, and not that I have, but I've heard that,
and that is true. In fact, there's numerous comments about it. He's egotistical buildings, blah blah blah. He shouldn't be called an architect. Period. Blah. And everything else. That goes to another article that we want to talk about. That you can't please everybody, kind of notion, and we'll get to that one. But let's look at some historical people that we study as master architects that weren't architects. Yep. Number one, Frank Lloyd Wright, never an architect.
Corbusier.
Corbusier, Daniel Burnham. I mean, on and on and on. I mean, you could just go through. I mean, hell, even now.
And that's actually that's what I love about the end of that article. What's in a name? Shakespeare famously wrote, "Fact is, it doesn't matter what much we were called. What matters is the truth of what we are doing, building, and creating for our world." And I'm glad that was the last sentence.
Right.
Because I'm not an architect, but I do architecture, and you can't negate that. You cannot tell me what I don't do or what I do. Right.
Well, okay. So I agree with all of that. And I have worked with people that never got their license, and they're just as much of an architect as I am. We do the same. We have done the same things for the same firms, in fact. And, they weren't licensed, and that's okay. They weren't the ones signing the drawings. They weren't the principal with the name on the door. He's the guy that was signing the drawings.
The liability. I mean, a lot of people...
Yeah, there's a huge problem.
A lot of people don't...
and actually, that right there is actually, something that's we should talk about too. I mean, how many architects that work in, mid to larger firms even do any signing and sealing?
Right.
They nobody in our office except for one person signs those documents. Period.
Yeah, when I worked for a firm that was a mid-sized firm, and then grew to a large-sized firm. There was one time I signed some plans in that office, and that was it. I mean, there was one guy basically who checked all the drawings. He's the guy that signed virtually every set.
Were you like, "Are you sure you want me to sign these?"
In that case, I wasn't worried about it. I was covered by the company's insurance.
Well,
so,
that's.
I mean, I wasn't personally going to be liable for anything, so that didn't necessarily bother me. Now, that being said, I haven't been sued, knock on wood. I have signed my own stuff since I have
the
been
exception to that rule.
Practicing. Yeah, well, it's probably like, what do they say about data loss, or hard drives? You're either had a hard drive fail or you're going to.
Right.
I guess
it's not if, it's when. Yeah.
It's not if and when, yeah. So let's knock on wood that doesn't happen. But, one of the things I wanted to touch on with this article, because it brings up the subject, and I think that for the most part, I think we can all agree that whether you're licensed or not, the practice of architecture can be done by people that are either licensed or not, and passing the test has sort of this rite of passage and something that those people that want to get licensed do, and that's that's what we want to do, and we do it. But I think what's interesting and what I found kind of fascinating about this article was the discussion of the term architect and how it's been sort of lost, and what do we do about that as a profession? So as a larger profession in general. Because if you search for, a job under architect, at least here in the Bay
profession.
Well, yeah, and especially here in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, where I live, it's all software architects. And so the term architect has just eroded to mean, certainly not building architect for the most part. And so what I find interesting about this is like, do we close ranks on this, as the article says? You're either licensed or you're not an architect, and what is the effect of that? Are we minimizing ourselves by getting so stuck on legally? The state of California says, if you practice the building architecture, you can't represent yourself as an architect. You can't use that term, architecture or architect, at all. And a lot of people get busted for that. I get quarterly newsletters with the most fascinating thing about the quarterly newsletters I get from the state licensing board is who got busted. Holy crap, those are the funniest things. It's like, really? You said what? And you did this? And wow, what an idiot. You deserve to get fined. And, but anyway, I think, what do we do about this? Are we, should we just say, hey, fine, everybody's an architect and embrace that idea, or, take the opposite tact and say, and rail against all these people that are using the term architect?
No, to backpedal off of what I was saying earlier about, the test and how, people are lacking of experience and stuff. I find extraordinary value in the term being a legal, term being used by people who've actually, taken and passed the tests and are licensed architects. We're talking about, if we look at the broader spectrum here, we're talking about life safety. We're talking about, there's several other, kind of like branch articles about it, and the comments in there, and anybody who's wants to go in and read this article, read the article, but read the comments, because the comments are coming from people from both sides of the fence, and it's really interesting to hear the comments that registered architects, and I'm going to just keep saying registered architects.
That's fine.
So step off, damn you. But registered architects take it very seriously, and they should, and we should. As a profession, we should take it very seriously, but to your point about, are we losing control of the term architect? We lost control of that thing a long time ago. I get into, we've got tons and tons of contractors, government contractors around here. Obviously, it's DC. But, and they're all architects. Now, not one of them are in the building and construction, design and construction industry. They are systems architects. They are, security system architects. They're this architect and that architect because they feel if they are building something, whether it's, tangible or not, they're an architect. And, it irks the hell out of me, when you say, well, hell, I can't even call myself an architect if I'm not licensed.
That's probably the worst part. Yeah.
And this guy can?
Right.
And
it doesn't really bother me. I guess one of the listeners of the show, Greg Laverdera, he posted on Jess Stafford's Big Time Small Firm, the Google Plus community, about this exact topic. And I agree with what he said, and he was basically saying that, that the term is has perceived value of prestige, and so of course people are going to adopt that. Like, yeah, of course they are. That's why they're doing it, right? Because it has this feel to it, right? And that's all they're going for, and they're not trying to co-opt anything from us at all, right? They're not trying to be perceived as a building architect. They are trying to play off the word, and that's right. When I feel like let them. That if they feel like that's their place in their industry, there's nothing we can do about that. And they are never going to say I'm an architect. They're going to say I am a software architect or I am a UI architect or whatever they're doing. They're never going to say I'm an architect. Right, because they don't want to be ambiguous like that.
Actually, I did meet somebody who used, who
no way.
Used that. Yes, absolutely used the ambiguous term of it. And he's like, "Well, I'm an architect." I was like, "Really? What firm do you work for?" And he's just like, "Well, I'm a private contractor for the government." I'm like, "Okay, well that sounds really interesting." So we start talking about.
What a
and
douchebag.
He's like, I we build systems. I'm like, oh. So you're not an architect. You're a computer programmer.
You really shouldn't call yourself an architect.
And it pissed him off because he thought that I devalued him by calling him a computer programmer when what I was really trying to do is say, you're not an architect in the sense that in the conversation that I thought, because, here I am, 15 years in the architecture profession, and I know what an architect is.
And did you say, no, don't be offended, because I'm not one either? Jesus.
No, I was...
Because, the other thing is, even comments on that same article were like, well, one of the authors isn't even an architect. And so now you have to be an architect to even have an opinion on this. Right? Give me a break.
Actually,
we are way too protective of this.
He breaks the rules here, by the way. He calls himself an architectural designer, and he lives in San Francisco, state of California. He's breaking the law.
Yeah.
You can't call yourself an architectural designer. So California. I'm nitpicking here, but it's like, this is what the law says. You can't use that terminology in representing yourself.
But see, you can nitpick even further, though, because, you have firms that call, recent graduates intern architects. You've got them as staff architects. You've got project architects. You've got senior project architects and all of this other stuff. And most likely, anybody who's senior project architect and lower is not a licensed architect. Right. Most likely they are, and there's rare occasions or whatever, but for the most part, project managers or above typically fall into, the registrar, or at least, a handful of them are registrar architects, and, not all of them. I don't want to get into, that kind of crap, but, you've got, we're breaking our own rules by giving people titles of project architect when they're not a project architect because they are not an architect. They're somebody with 5 years of experience with no, registration or license, and they're not they're not an architect.
Well, I think
so
two things come to my mind.
We're doing it, So
right. So
what do we do about it? We
our own rules.
Two things come to my mind. Number one is words have meaning. I tell my kid this. all the time. My kids, it's what you say matters.
Yeah.
And if you're misrepresenting yourself, then you're an idiot. I mean, and people like you, when this other guy called himself an architect, you called him on it.
Yeah.
And people need to do that. If it means something to you, you've got to do that. But the other thing that it really brings to my mind is that titles are difficult, right? Because there are if you go from one firm to another and you do the exact same job, you will have a different title. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
Right? There is no way that everybody can agree on this stuff.
Right.
You just can't. And it's like, what are you wasting your time worrying about this for?
You know, it's interesting, though, is if you look at the AIA billing and you look at the way that, like, you know, our particular firm breaks down the way that they do billing, they'll do billing and you'll look at, like, the hourly rates assigned to a staff architect,
position,
project architect, senior project
which
architect.
There's no standard for.
You know, and so they'll have, like, a cost breakdown of each of those particular things, you know, and as a project manager, you know, other than the senior project manager and the principal, you know, I'm billed at a higher rate than, you know, most everybody else in the office. But
you're special.
No, but I'm just saying is that's the yes, I know. Thank you. The short yellow bus kind, though. But but I mean, you know, it's the way. I mean, I'm trying to make a point about going back to the way that even firms title their own employees. I mean, by the very nature of the way that they're titled, the way that they bill, and everything else, we're breaking our own laws. You know, right. Because we aren't. You know, nobody is. You know, you're fresh out of college. You're not a project architect by law. You are a project architect because that is your role on the project, but you're not a project architect because you can't be called an architect.
Right.
You can't use the term.
So what I find interesting about that, Cormac, is that I have never heard anybody complain about firms titling people like that, but yet I hear everybody moaning and complaining about other folks using the title architect. Yeah, you know, if they're software architects or whatever other architects they are. You know, so it's like this double standard. It's like it's okay for us to break the rules, at least firms, for titles. Because what I find interesting is that most people that are working towards getting their license, care about that. You know, so they don't run around saying, I'm an architect. You know, they'll say, I'm a designer. You know, I'm working towards my license or something like that. And they're very careful about it, and because they care. And I think, you know, other folks, you know, they don't seem to care. And they'll just throw the word around. And so I guess we got to find, you know, some middle ground here.
How are we going to do that?
I have no idea.
There's no way.
I mean, do we need somebody like the AIA to step in and
how are they going to do that?
I have no idea.
They're not.
Maybe we do it internally. Maybe we need to tell, you know, the companies. The problem is that I was going to say maybe we need to tell the companies we work for, hey, I'm not an architect, so you can't call me a project architect. But the problem is with that is that a lot of the billing structure for projects is tied into, you know, a certain level of person working on the project. So if you're just a draftsman or drafter 3 or 2 or 1 or whatever, project architect, senior project architect, or project manager, you know, all these different titles have different dollar values assigned to them, and are typically. And so if you're working at a certain rate on a project, you know, you need to bill out at that rate. So they just call you that because that's the rate they need to bill you at for that project. Or maybe that's the level of responsibility, whether you're licensed or not.
This is ludicrous.
That you're doing, right?
They don't bill you. You're on a fixed fee or a % of construction. You make the money or you make the money. It takes what it takes to get the job done. Like, I understand what's going on, but it is an accountant's way of doing things.
Sure.
It is not a creative way of doing things. You do what you need to do to get the job done.
Right.
In a firm, you don't have to track all those hours. You just don't. You just do the job. And so that's all, on some level, bullshit, right? When it comes down to it.
Well, it's tracked internally, it's not tracked externally by the client to...
But, yeah, I know what you're saying. It's tracked internally, but even then, those time cards are fiction. Because you, Cormac, don't put down all your hours, do you? You just don't.
So what I'm
because you work 80 hours a
is,
week instead of 40. But you don't want to put 80 hours on the job because then it looks like you're not profitable. It's just all BS. And so, like, when it comes back to all these indexes and all this stuff, it's just numbers for the sake of writing an article in a magazine. It's not even reality. And I think this is like the main nut of the whole problem is we are thinking about the wrong things. We are totally thinking of architecture compared to accounting or architecture compared to fashion. We are not talking about architecture, right? We're trying to measure ourselves against all these other things that are going on in the world. It makes me crazy.
Evan, I agree with you, but I will say this, though, is that internally, for a firm, and I'm not proposing, because I have worked at a place that really dove into the numbers, and it drove me crazy. I was like, why am I sitting in this meeting for 2 hours with 6 other people from this 40-person office, wasting 2 hours of time talking about numbers. Let me get out and get my job done because I'm not doing it right now. But anyway, but what I was gonna, there's my little side rant there. But internally though, I mean, maybe not on projects that you work on where you're working on a percentage of the construction cost and you have these multi-month or year timelines, which we have talked about before, are all just small timelines added up over a long period of time. But for some of the work, a lot of the work that I do in residential, those timelines are pretty small and short, and oftentimes you can break a job down by saying, okay, we only have X number of dollars to do this project because we're not doing it based on cost of construction. We have a fee. It's $10,000.
Right.
Okay, well, I'm getting paid X number of dollars an hour. That you just do simple math, and it tells you, okay, I've got 200 hours to get this job done, and 200 hours is 4 weeks of time or whatever, broken up with 3 or 4 people. That's like, okay, we have to be done by the end of the month, or we don't make any money on this project, or the job costs us money.
Yeah, no, I totally get that, and that's the side that I fall on too, because I do put down all the hours that I work, but I know lots of people who want their jobs to look profitable, and they don't do that. And so then, how is that even possible? What you're talking about? If they want to look at historical data to give them an idea of how long the next project is going to take, that is the same type, it's a similar program, all those things, and the numbers aren't right. You can't. It doesn't work.
You're absolutely right. I mean, my wife used to work for a firm where, just slight sidebar here, but I mean, they asked her what she thought, the project would cost, and I'll throw out round numbers here. I think it was like $80,000 or something was her estimate at some point, and they wanted the project, so they cut the fee to like $50,000 or something like that. They took 30-40 grand off of it, or maybe half, And so then when the project started going over budget, because obviously it was going to go over budget.
Because you can't do it.
Because you can't magically do it in half the amount of time.
Right.
She started getting in trouble. It was like, oh, why is this project so far over budget?
And I think you've talked about that before.
I think maybe I have, and but at the end of the day, Evan, you're absolutely right. You need to put down that figure, the hours you're putting in for that historical information, so you can tell in the future. Okay, well, this project really took us, 400 hours, not 200. and therefore we better price it accordingly, or we just make the decision. Okay, yeah, we're gonna do it for the cost of 200 hours, and we either figure out a way to do it in 200 hours, or we realize, okay, yeah, we won't make any money on it. Maybe there's valid reasons. Maybe, hey, this is a prestigious project. It doesn't matter. This will get us more jobs. Who knows? I mean, You need to make those decisions and move on. Anyway, we kind of strayed off from the topic of
yeah, we did.
Of architecture.
I think Cormac still has things to add there.
Okay, go ahead, Cormac, because we want to move on to this other article about Starbucks too.
Oh no, there are some other articles that are very similar to that, and in fact, Arc Daily's got one that basically references this, the AIA's LinkedIn post, and then it references the Fast Company one. So we'll put those in the show notes and link that. So there's several different ones talking about does the title of architect deserve to be protected and so on. And so there's some really interesting perspectives from the guy who wrote this particular article. And again, the value of the article is not just in the article and the content of the article itself, but it's in the perspectives that the comments or the commenters are presenting here, because they make some great points about why they value the term architect.
Well, and it's important, I think, to point out of whose perspective are you caring about, because one of the quotes in the article, in the Fast Company article, was really on point. And it says the effort to criminalize alternate uses of the word and to chastise those designers who use it is a desperate grasp to retain relevance. I mean, basically what they're saying is the only people who care about this are architects, right?
Yeah. We're the only ones who care about it. I mean, if you sit there and, I've got, a couple of friends who are registered who really care about the term. But, what they don't care about is their own personal level of knowledge and care of the craft. They just care about the title.
I mean, the public, when they go into a building, they're not, and if something were wrong with it, they're not assuming it's the architect automatically. I mean, there's so many parties involved. I mean, really, the public's relying on the building codes and the officials to make sure that they're safe, right? There's inspectors, there's codes, there's all these entities. I mean, when you don't even think about this stuff, right? When you go into a building, but on a level that all of this stuff had to work for it to be deemed occupiable.
But that's what you think of when you go into a building. When other people go into it and they think about the building and stuff, and if they're not familiar with, the profession and what goes into it, they're only going to think of one person, the architect. The architect's bad. This is a poorly designed space, or this is a great space. The architect is good, and stuff like that. I mean, there's rarely, or at least in my experience, I'm not going to, speak for you or anything, but I'm just saying that rarely do I find anybody who lays blame or applause to anybody but the architect for a successful or failed building.
I don't agree with that, because people live in houses that are a copy of 200 other houses that are 5 feet away from their next door neighbor. They're not thinking about the architect.
Oh, well,
this is what they're used to.
Yeah.
Mediocre buildings,
Right. Well, you know what? That's actually honestly another topic, and about and I do actually
most
really
architects
want to put
live
that on our list. Well, yeah. I'm pretty sure we all. Well, no, Neil designed his own. Well, he designed the renovation to his house, so we can't say mediocre for that one, because I've seen the pictures and it's nice.
It's nice.
You could say mediocre. I mean, it's not great, but it's nice. It functions.
I mean, To all of the potential clients of Neopan Architects, he was only kidding.
They're not listening to this anyway.
Yeah. Preaching to the choir.
Yeah. Anyway.
But I mean, the actually what you and I, Evan, are talking about is, in the perception of, architect or not, when, somebody walks into a building is honestly a great segue into the other article that we wanted to talk about, which is, and let me click over to it.
I left the profession.
What Starbucks gets that architects don't, or why I left the architecture profession.
Right.
Which was an extremely interesting, albeit in my own personal view, a bit kind of naive in a way that basically, an article about how architects listen to their ego, not their client.
And I mean, I would throw in a disclaimer up front, and you guys know this as well as I'm sure the author of that did. I mean, you can never say enough. This is a generalization up front,
well,
right? Because you just can't cover all the bases. There's just no way.
But see, and that's the reason why this particular article fired so many people up. Because it was a broad stroke generalization about the entire profession and not, a select few. Because there are a select few that, we'll go back to that one quote that I don't necessarily particularly care for from old Frankie, who, about, I don't know why people hire architects when they want to tell us what,
Yeah.
And, if they don't want us to, and then they want to tell us what to do, kind of thing, and it just, there comes a point when you really do need to kind of step back and kind of distill certain people and personas in architecture to the general population of architects and architectural professional designers, their engineers and everybody else who are busting their ass to get a good, well-designed, well-coordinated building together that suits the needs of the clients. And so saying suits the need of the clients, to me, automatically triggers that, you will sit there and you will listen to the client. And the thing that, and I was wanted to bring this up to you, Evan. I mean, you and I, in what we do with public schools and things like that, we listen to committee after committee after committee on, whether it's the PTA, the teachers, the administrative staff, the area coordinators, the actual project managers within the capital construction department, and all these other things. I mean, there's hundreds of people that typically want to offer their opinion about how the building should look or function and everything else. So you're getting all of this input and you're listening to everybody. Mm-hmm. How can you make one building that fits all?
Yeah.
You can't.
Right.
So if I do by chance ignore one person because I'm trying to make a comfortable building for the end user, which is the teachers and the students, so now am I shamed into being lumped into what architects don't get because they're not listening to every single solitary person? I'm not sitting out there, doing some anthropomorphic study of, how people sit down in every, different form or fashion, and I haven't polled thousands of people to tell them, for them to tell me what what the building should be.
I think it's ludicrous that she picked Starbucks for this. And the reason why is, just pulling up the Wikipedia article on Starbucks, it says right now that they have 20,891 stores in 62 countries.
Right.
If that isn't the ability to build upon the last one and do it better every time, I don't know what another model is that could do that any better, right? and you're saying it exactly right. You have a completely unique set of constraints, program requirements, and people and budget that is completely different than the next project you're going to do. 100% different.
Right.
And it's like, I don't know how you can possibly compare Starbucks with architecture and architects, you know?
Well, I mean, it goes, you know...
I see what she's saying, but... Jeez.
Well, you know, exactly, you know, and although, you know, and then I was, you know, just reading the article, and, you know, Starbucks interviewed hundreds of coffee drinkers before determining that round tables would be the best solution for people. And then it goes on further to say there are no empty seats at a round table, and yet they post a picture with a
bunch of empty tables,
with a half-empty Starbucks showing empty round tables.
Yep.
You know, I understand what she's trying to say about, you know, the aspect of the round table and the conversational aspect of it and all that other stuff. But I mean, again, what you just said is it doesn't, you know, okay, so they interviewed 100, you know, or hundreds. of coffee drinkers over, would you say, 20,000?
Yep, almost 21,000 stores.
And I can guarantee that just like the local Starbucks that I went to today probably had hundreds of coffee drinkers come in and out of their door just in the first few hours of the morning.
Well, and maybe she's generalizing
in their square tables.
I mean, and so what? Yeah, mine too.
Yeah.
But maybe what she's saying is people like Starbucks. I mean, and why? You know, why do people like to be there?
No.
And I think what she's saying is people respond to what they're doing. And you can tell. I mean, Starbucks did go through a recent kind of an upgrade to a lot of their stores. In my area, they upgraded every single one of them.
They're going through that process around here.
And I mean, they run that place like a business, right? I mean, they definitely are catering to their customers.
And they should. I mean,
totally.
Well, okay. I mean, and what they're doing is they're trying, you know, they've done these studies that basically say, you know, you're not going to have, you know, it's interesting that, you know, there was Starbucks that had, you know, the big, large, comfy couches and chairs and stuff like that. But it's slowly but surely been streamlined to have, you know, these, just like the, you know, these photographs show, you know, these large, you know, these high chairs with the high tables, you know, and it's changed from, you know, just the basic comfortable lounger that'll stay around for maybe, you know, an hour or so and read a book, read the newspaper and stuff, to people who will go in there, you know, they'll sit down to enjoy their coffee and maybe they'll get up and they'll go and get another coffee before they leave, or, you know, because they're in there and they see the pastries and stuff, they'll say, yeah, let me go grab a pastry. But they're not in there for a while and so their model is basically now changed from the lounger to get them in and out. And that's not what the intent of architecture really is. It's the intent of businesses. So when we're sitting down and listening to all of our, I'm trying to find my point here. You know,
Searching.
When we sit down and, you know, we go through all of these interviews, because that's what I think they really are when we're sitting down and talking to all of the different user groups of, like, you know, a public school or you know, other community buildings and stuff. I mean, we sit down and we interview them. We you know, try to find out how they use the building, you know, what they do and everything else, to try to find out what is the best comfort level of the building. You know, how is it best going to be used and things like that. So, I mean, we have a slightly different mindset that we're not trying to rotate customers in and out, you know, to maximize profitability. We're trying to, you know, find the sweet spot of the building, you know, yep. And try and say, okay, you know, we aren't going to get everybody to be happy. But if we find that sweet spot where at least everybody can enjoy it for the period that they're there, and then, you know, I don't know. I just looking at all these little things. It gets
I think why she left the profession is because she can't handle this profession. She doesn't understand it. She doesn't know how to work in it.
Well, there's definitely that side of the argument. It's like, well, instead of leaving the profession, why don't you try to fix it? If you see a huge problem with it, because first of all, it's not a fair argument to pin up architecture versus Starbucks.
No, she's got an axe to grind here.
Yeah,
totally. She definitely has she had a bad work experience.
And there is a rebuttal article to this.
I know, and we'll link to that as well. But I want to talk just for a moment about this. I mean, this is this is an article written to get some hits and to make her some money. It's poorly written. It just hits on different little things here and there, and she points out that apparently we don't interview anybody, and because Starbucks does, and they're not a sponsor of this show, but they should be after all the promotion they're getting tonight or today on this show, but. And it says, okay, well, architects, they don't listen. And look, Starbucks interviewed a few hundred people, and they have roundtables now. Look, they listen. They know it. Architects don't get it. And it's like, look, I'm sorry here, but really, did you just spend the first part of your architecture profession just drawing bathroom details or something? Because, the rest of us out here actually do talk to our clients. We talk to people.
Well, and there you go.
That's our job. Is to listen. That's my job.
You didn't interview my clients.
I'm a sole practitioner. And what do you think I do? I spend the first 2 hours meeting with somebody for free, by the way, most of the time. And it's like, I talk to them about what's the problem? How can I help you solve it? Okay, look. This is what I'm doing. Oh, I'm sorry. Santiago Calatrava has some leaking buildings, and he's got some issues. And see, look, architects don't pay any attention to the human needs. We need shelter. What a bunch of bullshit. Come on. Really?
Yeah.
There's your boing. Do you get a boing moment for that one? Maybe not.
No, that's a tame.
That's not worthy. Okay, but I mean, really? I mean, come on. And then she goes on to talk about. Are there people in photographs? We talked about that one last week. But it's like, yeah, last episode, I should say. But it's like, we only care about obscure angles in a place where two materials meet. Yeah, well, you know what? We're architects. We get off on that stuff because we learn. And it's really cool. And like Cormac said in our last episode, if I wanted people in there, I would have designed them. Otherwise, get out of the way. But, we design our buildings for people. Who the hell do you think lives in these buildings?
That's the whole point of architecture.
But it is the whole point. Look, and she doesn't get that. She doesn't get that. She doesn't give any time or consideration. That's why I think and I don't know this. Hey, you know what, Christine, contact us. Let us know. I mean, did you spend the first 6 months or year or 3 years of your, profession practicing architecture, she says, in Australia, drawing just bathroom details or something really boring? Did you have a boss that was really mean to you or something? I mean, what is your problem? Because you don't get it. You didn't even stay in the profession long enough. And, maybe that's probably not a bad thing because we really don't want you in our profession anyway. So time to move on and go be what are you now? Some human centrist, smart city, big data I don't know what the hell that means. She's anyway, I'm sorry. I'm going off because this is a bullshit article. And this is the kind of crap that, who published this? I don't even know. Medium.com. Yeah. I don't even know what that is. But, they're shooting for hints.
It got plenty of traction in other, like ArcDaily and things like that. And then the rebuttal, with ArcDaily. And I'm sure it was posted on numerous other, social media sites.
And she gets money for every hit it takes. And that's all this is. It's a stupid-ass link-bait article, poorly written, blah, 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 as she says. Come on. Spend a little bit of time and think about, what architects really do. I don't think she knows. I don't think she has an idea.
Well, that's why I think everybody should go and read Guy Horton's article on Arc Daily, and we'll have the link. It's called The Indicator, a rebuttal to why I left the architecture profession. And he's very succinct in his response, and it's a breakdown of everything that she says. And it's basically, talking exactly like what you were talking about, Neil, and even with the comments, again, going down and reading the comments, because a lot of people have a lot of things to say. And really, the original article, generated probably the most heated of discussions, and it was really interesting because you're right. I mean, there's a lot of people that I do know that come into this profession thinking it's one thing. School doesn't really necessarily dispel that myth. So then when they finally get to the profession and they realize, holy crap, I'm not drawing 100% of the time. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I am doing toilet details. I'm learning how to do, these construction change directives and all of these other things. And these are not things that I would have probably pursued the rest of my degree if they would have told me everything that I would have been doing.
Yeah, right.
And so
well, that's why you're listening to this show, right?
And so you get in, you get into the profession. You've got stars in your eyes. You're going to be the next, star architect, where you're going to design all these beautiful, wonderful spaces. And then you find out that you've got all of these constraints. You've got everything that's, piling on of all of these, things that you wrangled in, and you're just, you have you start getting a bad taste in your mouth that this isn't really what you signed up for in the first place. And then, you might work for an asshole of a boss or a project manager that, kind of treats you poorly because they, are just trying to get the job done, and they're, pushing and pushing and pushing. And, you didn't sign up for, 80 hours of work a week. You want to have a life. You want to go, meet up with your friends at the bar and drink and play soccer and all this other crap. You want to do all this stuff, but, you can't because, the job has now taken over your life. And so now it sucks. And, you have this extra grind about, why architecture is, this, that, the other. And reading Guy's article is, it's fantastic because it's how every one of us would have answered and, responded to her. Because, he basically just said, that all her article was just basically, a drone strike. It was just this, from afar, I don't really know the profession, so I'm just going to, based off of my one experience, I'm going to say that the entire profession is exactly this way. And it's not. And in fact, it's probably completely the opposite of exactly what she, experienced in her, you probably go and you work for some star architect because, it's a great pad for your resume, or at least you think it is. And so, you go work for the Frankies or Zahas and all this other stuff. And a lot of people that I know that actually did work for them, believe that they were kind of a tyrant. Because they've got demanding standards and all this other stuff. I want it this way. I want it this way. I want it this way. Well, I have never worked for somebody like that. I've worked for people who, take you out, when you first get out, they take you to the job sites, kind of show you, construction, show you kind of why you're doing what you're doing and everything else. And, and really kind of foster and teach you how to be just the opposite of what she thinks we really are.
But we all know people who are like that.
Oh, absolutely.
And I went out with my friend Mark after work today, and he made a beautiful point where the argument happens every day in all of our offices. And that argument is, when it really comes down to it, what does it look like? And I think he made this brilliant point where it's like, who cares what it looks like? Do you realize, I'm looking right now, there's 783 million people in the world who have no access to water, and you care what your building looks like? No, it's all about solving the problems of who hired you to solve those goddamn problems. And that's it.
Right.
And so
Absolutely.
The problem is that she's talking about someone that we know. We know exactly who she's talking about. And the truth is there are people like that. You can't deny it. But
there are.
That's not Yeah, I mean, and that's why that's why
that's
you're
the
offended
1%.
by it.
That's the 1% of the art of architecture. If you go and you start polling the 99%, that care about listening to the client, then you're going to have a completely different perspective on it, and you would have never written a article like that.
Yep.
Because that article, as Guy's response was, it was just this emotional attack on probably her bad experience.
Yeah, she's venting. Yep. Yep.
So
Well, I think what's interesting about all the stuff we've talked about tonight is how powerful the soapbox is.
Oh yeah.
It's very interesting to me that we are at a point where we all have this tremendous voice, right? I've never heard of any of these people before, right? I mean, I've heard of Guy Horton. I've read some of his Indicator articles previously. But other than that, I haven't heard of the authors of these other articles. I mean, whether they're architects or not, whether they've worked in it or not. But what is interesting is these articles have brought upon so much awareness because of blogs and social media and people actually having conversations. I mean, we're talking about this. Our audience is listening to it, right? So that's pretty interesting to me. And I think we're at a point, and this is something that, we've talked about before, but we have the ability to have global conversations about what matters to us. And we have the ability to change perspective and perception, and it's pretty amazing. It's pretty awesome that we can actually do that now. I mean, having a podcast about architecture, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 years ago would have been unheard of. You know what I mean? And so now we're at a point where these debates are happening, and I think a lot of people get upset when somebody publishes their opinion. But the truth is like it's never been easier to put your opinion out there and get people talking about it. I think that's the kind of thing that actually can be really good for the profession that we're in, is that people can actually hash this stuff out and give these types of perspectives.
Well, and you're right.
Because is the AIA doing this? Is NCARB doing this? I mean, back to that. I mean, there's been more talked about these articles than I've seen from any one of these enormous associations in the last 10 years.
Well, do you know that I get more professional development talking with other architects, other design professionals, other engineers, door hardware manufacturers and representatives. I mean, I get more out of the conversation that we have over Twitter and Facebook and, through our conversation on the podcast. I get more professional development through that tool than I do through our organizations that are supposed to be providing the professional development that,
let's not go
we
down
truly
that
need.
Rabbit hole.
Well, no, but I mean,
you're right.
But,
and that's probably a topic for another show, though.
Well, but I mean, I just want to, playing off of, Evan's notion of the soapbox. I mean,
Sure.
That's where, I mean, we now, it's giving the voice to the voiceless, if you want to, go that cheesy route. But I mean, it basically is that we are now we're not alone. We, everybody can commiserate with each other and, have these chats about, I had this contractor that did this, or I have this client that did that, and all this other stuff. And I had that same problem. And it doesn't just stop there, where we're just, in some little wine session. I mean, we sit there and we talk about how we can get through it and what's the best way to possibly, deal with situations like that. Or, I had a problem like that, with that particular detail and I worked it out this way, and it's given us an opportunity to actually expand our horizon and get inputs of different experiences and perspectives that otherwise we would never get over some, wine and cheese event at an AIA, design award.
Well, it also gives accountability, right? Because now, I mean, it's not just architects. I guess I'm not allowed to call myself that, but you're not the only one with a soapbox. I mean, Your clients have a soapbox now.
Right.
And I think that's something that Guy Horton even said in his article, if I remember correctly. But he was like, this will weed itself out because now everybody has a voice, and they're the ones who are going to say, this architect sucked, and this contractor sucked. And they have the ability. I mean, Yelp is a huge player in this market all of a sudden, right? I mean, it's an app on your phone. If I want to find somebody to do that I need something done for, I'm going to go on there and I'm going to read those reviews. And now everybody has a voice. And so you, more than ever, have the need and desire to do the right thing. And that's super powerful.
Absolutely. But Cormac, not to burst your bubble, though, that article that we started off with from Fast Company started off with a discussion thread on the American Institute of Architects LinkedIn group. So, maybe they're not directly fostering or raising these questions or talking about this or helping us in that way, but that LinkedIn group did actually start this all off. So, maybe that's just a happy coincidence, but
no, actually, that was a rebuttal to, or a response to the RIBA, whatever it is.
RIBA.
Sure, it was actually them talking about, oh, I read this article, and Daniel Libeskind has the nerve of calling himself an architect in London. Well, he's not.
Well, I think
but you're right.
Raises,
in fairness to the AIA, real quick though, they, with discussion groups like LinkedIn, I think, and they are active on Twitter and stuff like that. They are joining the discussion, and they are coming into, the fold of all of this. They're going to need to do a better job of actually listening to what we're saying rather than just say, yeah, here's your platform. I've got a couple of extra soapboxes.
The thing about all these other blogs is they break out of that echo chamber, right? It's not just architects anymore talking about this stuff. It's everybody. Fast Company is well regarded by tons of people who have nothing to do with architecture. And there's an article about architecture. Really calling yourself an architect on Fast Company. That's huge, right?
Right.
Well, this has drawn more attention.
That's good.
Yeah,
I
agree.
Good? That's good for us. That's good for the profession. We need to get that out. The AIA has been trying forever, trying to figure out a way to get us out in front of the public, right? More, and here it is, and that's good. That's good for us, and hopefully as the economy gets better, and this is good for all of us. It gets us involved in the conversation with everybody else, and so that this is a positive thing. So,
yeah.
So, guys, I think we're about ready to wrap this up.
Yeah.
We're ready. We've hit our time. So with that, please, give us your comments. We've hashed out kind of some of our thoughts and randomly, bounced around a lot of different ideas or thoughts about, what we've talked about for this episode concerning the title architect. How do our listeners feel about this? Let us know. Visit our website at archispeakpodcast.com. And you'll find the Archispeak Twitter account and links to our own individual Twitter accounts and a link to the Archispeak Facebook webpage. You can leave us comments on all of those places. And if you have a really good point about this that you'd like to make, call and leave us a message at 415-484-8496. And join in the conversation, please. And don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes. We really like seeing those, too.
That's right.
Yeah, we would definitely love to hear some comments and get this conversation going with our listeners. And, make sure, as we're talking about, engagement from everybody, we'd love to hear it.
That's true. All right.
All right. Thanks for listening, guys.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
I joined the choir to sing. They're all competing for some other thing. I joined the choir to sing. I joined the choir to sing. They're all competing for some other thing. I joined the choir to sing. Say I eat, breathe, erase my feet, my face, chase the one thing